45 years ago, on June 15, 1974, 9-year-old Tommy Wilson, his 7-year-old sister Rachel, and 5-year-old brother Mark disappeared after playing at Reverchon Park in Dallas, plunging their family into a nightmare that would consume decades of their lives. The 3 children had been playing on the swings as the sun set, their laughter echoing through the humid Texas evening when they simply vanished without leaving a single trace behind. Before continuing, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen archived cases with respect and proof. Their parents, Robert and Margaret Wilson, had trusted their neighborhood park as a safe haven where children could play freely. Robert, a hard-working mechanic at a local garage, and Margaret, a devoted housewife who spent her days caring for their 4 children, never imagined that a simple evening at the park would tear their world apart forever. The Wilson family represented the American dream of the 1970s, a tight-knit family living in a modest home on Elm Street, where neighbors knew each other and children played outside until dark. When the children failed to return home by 8 p.m., Margaret's maternal instinct immediately sensed danger. She sent their oldest daughter, Linda, to check the park while she and Robert began searching the neighborhood, calling their names through the warm summer night. By 9 p.m., when there was still no sign of Tommy, Rachel, or Mark, Robert contacted the Dallas Police Department, beginning what would become one of the longest and most heartbreaking missing persons cases in Texas history. The initial police response was swift, but ultimately insufficient. Officers canvassed the park and surrounding areas, interviewed potential witnesses, and launched a search operation that involved dozens of volunteers from the community. The case attracted significant media attention, with local newspapers running front-page stories about the missing Wilson children and television stations broadcasting their photographs during evening news programs. Detective James Morrison, the lead investigator assigned to the case, worked tirelessly during those first crucial weeks. He interviewed park employees, checked with local hospitals, and followed up on dozens of tips called in by concerned citizens. However, despite his dedication and the community's support, the investigation quickly reached a dead end when no credible leads emerged and no witnesses could provide useful information about what happened to the children. As weeks turned into months, the Wilson family's hope began to transform into desperate determination. Margaret quit her part-time job at a local diner to dedicate herself entirely to searching for her children, posting flyers throughout Dallas and organizing search parties that scoured every corner of the city. Robert continued working to support the family financially, but those who knew him could see the toll the tragedy was taking on his spirit and health. The case officially went cold after 6 months of intensive investigation, leaving the Wilson family to face the devastating reality that their children might never come home. The police department, overwhelmed with new cases and lacking any substantial evidence, gradually shifted resources away from the Wilson investigation, though they assured the family that the case would remain open and active. The disappearance of the Wilson children became a defining tragedy for the Dallas community, forever changing how parents viewed their children's safety and highlighting the vulnerability of innocent families to inexplicable crimes that seemed to have no resolution or justice. The months following the disappearance transformed the Wilson household into a shrine of desperate hope and unbearable grief. Margaret Wilson became consumed with maintaining her children's memory, refusing to change anything in their shared bedroom, and insisting on setting 4 places at the dinner table every night, believing that Tommy, Rachel, and Mark would eventually walk through their front door as if nothing had happened. Robert Wilson channeled his anguish into relentless action, spending every weekend driving through Texas cities and towns, showing photographs of his children to anyone who would listen. He visited truck stops, diners, and bus stations throughout the state, following up on reported sightings that inevitably led nowhere but never deterred his unwavering commitment to finding his children. Their surviving daughter, Linda, who was 12 years old when her siblings disappeared, struggled to maintain normalcy while watching her parents deteriorate under the weight of their loss. She excelled in school as a way to honor her missing siblings and provide her parents with moments of pride, but she carried the burden of survivor's guilt and the responsibility of being the only remaining child in a family desperate for closure. The Dallas Police Department's interest in the case began to wane as 1975 approached, with Detective Morrison being reassigned to new cases and the Wilson file relegated to a growing stack of cold cases that received minimal attention. The family's relationship with law enforcement became increasingly strained as they felt abandoned by the very system they had trusted to bring their children home safely. Margaret Wilson's mental health deteriorated significantly during this period, leading to several hospitalizations for severe depression and anxiety. She became convinced that the police were hiding information about her children's fate and began conducting her own investigation, which often put her at odds with official efforts and strained her marriage to Robert, who tried to maintain faith in the authorities. The community that had initially rallied around the Wilson family gradually returned to their normal lives, with the exception of a small group of neighbors who continued to support the family's search efforts. Local churches organized prayer vigils and fundraising events, but the sustained media attention that had characterized the early months of the case eventually faded as new stories captured public interest. By 1976, the Wilson family had spent nearly 2 years in limbo, caught between hope and despair while dealing with the practical challenges of living with unresolved trauma. Robert's health began to suffer from the stress, and he developed heart problems that would plague him for the rest of his life, while Margaret struggled to maintain relationships with friends who found her single-minded focus on the missing children difficult to handle. The case file, which had once been thick with witness statements, search reports, and investigative leads, remained largely untouched in the Dallas Police Department's archives, representing not just a professional failure, but a human tragedy that had destroyed one family's faith in justice and left an entire community questioning their sense of security and trust. As the 1970s gave way to the 1980s, the Wilson family faced the crushing reality that their children's case had been forgotten by everyone except those who loved Tommy, Rachel, and Mark most. The Dallas Police Department had officially classified the case as cold, meaning it received no active investigation unless new evidence emerged, leaving the family to continue their search with diminishing resources and support. Margaret Wilson's determination never wavered, even as her physical and emotional strength began to fail. She spent countless hours at the local library, researching missing children cases across the country and corresponding with families who had experienced similar tragedies. Her dining room table became a command center, covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and photographs as she tried to identify patterns or connections that law enforcement had missed. Robert Wilson struggled to balance his need to search for his children with the practical demands of supporting his surviving family. His job at the garage suffered as he frequently requested time off to follow leads or attend meetings with private investigators, whom the family hired with their limited savings when they could afford to do so. Agora, te convido a deixar nos comentários de onde você está nos assistindo e o horário exato em que escuta esta história. Nos interessa saber até quais lugares e em quais momentos do dia ou da noite chegam estes relatos documentados. Linda Wilson graduated from high school in 1980 and chose to attend college close to home so she could continue supporting her parents' search efforts. She studied journalism, hoping that her future career might help her investigate her siblings' disappearance and bring attention to other cold cases that had been abandoned by the system. The 1980s brought new technologies and investigative techniques that gave the Wilson family brief moments of hope. When age progression photographs became available, Margaret spent her life savings to have updated images created showing what Tommy, Rachel, and Mark might look like as teenagers, distributing these images to schools, malls, and community centers throughout Texas. Detective Morrison, who had been promoted within the Dallas Police Department, occasionally checked in with the Wilson family and reviewed the case file when time permitted. However, without new evidence or witnesses, there was little he could do beyond offering sympathy and assurances that the case remained officially open, though inactive. The family's search efforts became more sophisticated as they learned from other families dealing with similar tragedies. They organized annual awareness events on the anniversary of the disappearance, distributed flyers at state fairs and public gatherings, and even hired a private investigator in 1985 who reviewed the case but found no new leads worth pursuing. As the 1990s approached, Margaret Wilson's health declined significantly due to years of stress and neglect of her own medical needs. She developed diabetes and heart problems, but refused to slow down her search efforts, believing that any day spent not looking for her children was a betrayal of their memory and a missed opportunity to bring them home. The case that had once generated headlines and community support had become a personal crusade, carried out by a family that refused to accept defeat, even as the world around them moved forward and the likelihood of finding answers seemed to diminish with each passing year. The 1990s introduced revolutionary changes in law enforcement technology that sparked renewed hope for families dealing with cold cases, including the Wilsons. DNA testing, computerized databases, and improved communication systems between police departments offered possibilities that had never existed during the initial investigation of the children's disappearance. Margaret Wilson, now in her 60s and struggling with multiple health issues, became an advocate for incorporating new technologies into cold case investigations. She attended conferences, wrote letters to politicians, and lobbied the Dallas Police Department to review her children's case using modern investigative tools, though her requests were often met with polite dismissals due to budget constraints and manpower limitations. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, established in 1984, became a valuable resource for the Wilson family. Linda Wilson, now working as a journalist for a Dallas newspaper, helped her parents navigate the organization's services and worked to keep her siblings' case active in their database, ensuring that any potential matches would be flagged for investigation. Robert Wilson's health continued to deteriorate throughout the 1990s, culminating in a heart attack in 1995 that left him partially disabled and unable to continue the physical aspects of searching for his children. The man who had once driven thousands of miles following leads was now confined to his home, relying on phone calls and letters to continue his investigation. Detective Morrison, approaching retirement, made one final comprehensive review of the Wilson case in 1996, utilizing new computer systems to cross-reference information and check for connections to other cases. His review confirmed what the family had feared for over 2 decades. There were no substantial leads or evidence that could be pursued with the resources available to the department. The Internet revolution of the late 1990s provided new opportunities for the Wilson family to publicize their children's case. Linda Wilson created one of the first websites dedicated to missing children from Texas, featuring detailed information about Tommy, Rachel, and Mark, along with contact information for anyone with relevant information. Margaret Wilson's determination remained unshakable, even as her body began to fail. She spent her days writing letters to law enforcement agencies across the country, following up on any missing children cases that might be connected to her own, and maintaining detailed records of every contact and conversation related to the search for her children. The family's financial situation had become precarious due to decades of medical bills, private investigator fees, and travel expenses related to their search efforts. Robert's disability benefits provided minimal income, and Margaret's health prevented her from working, leaving Linda to support her parents while continuing her own career and search efforts. As the 20th century drew to a close, the Wilson family faced the devastating milestone of having searched for their children longer than the children had been alive when they disappeared, a mathematical reality that highlighted the extraordinary passage of time and the family's incredible perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The dawn of the 21st century brought both technological advances and personal losses that would reshape the Wilson family's decades-long search for answers. In 2001, Robert Wilson passed away from complications related to his heart condition, taking with him 27 years of accumulated knowledge, contacts, and theories about his children's disappearance, but leaving behind detailed journals that would prove invaluable to continuing the investigation. Margaret Wilson, now widowed and in declining health, refused to allow her husband's death to end their mission. With Linda's support, she digitized Robert's handwritten journals and created comprehensive databases of every lead, contact, and theory they had pursued over the years, ensuring that decades of investigative work would not be lost to time or circumstance. The establishment of the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, offered new possibilities for resolving cold cases, but the Wilson children's case presented unique challenges since no physical evidence had ever been recovered from their disappearance. Without DNA samples or personal belongings, the family could only hope that future developments might somehow connect to their case. Linda Wilson, now an experienced journalist specializing in criminal justice issues, used her professional skills to investigate her siblings' case with renewed vigor. She cultivated relationships with law enforcement officials, forensic experts, and other families dealing with similar tragedies, building a network that extended far beyond Dallas and Texas. The 9/11 attacks in 2001 significantly impacted law enforcement priorities and resources, with many cold case investigations receiving even less attention as agencies focused on terrorism prevention and homeland security. This shift in priorities meant that cases like the Wilson children's disappearance, already relegated to inactive status, became even less likely to receive official attention. Margaret Wilson's health continued to decline throughout the early 2000s, but she remained mentally sharp and emotionally committed to finding answers about her children's fate. She began working with Linda to write a book about their experience, hoping that publicity might generate new leads or encourage someone with information to come forward after decades of silence. In 2005, the Wilson family organized a 31st anniversary memorial service for Tommy, Rachel, and Mark, which drew attention from local media and renewed public interest in the case. Several attendees shared memories of the children and the impact their disappearance had on the community. But no new information emerged that could advance the investigation. The proliferation of cold case television shows and documentaries during this period offered the Wilson family opportunities to publicize their case to national audiences. Linda Wilson successfully lobbied producers to feature her siblings' story on several programs, generating hundreds of tips that ultimately proved fruitless but demonstrated continued public interest in the case. As Margaret Wilson entered her 70s, she began to acknowledge that she might not live to see her children's case resolved, but she extracted promises from Linda to continue the search and never allow Tommy, Rachel, and Mark to be forgotten by a world that had moved on from their tragedy. The mid-2000s brought social media platforms that revolutionized how families could publicize missing persons cases and connect with others facing similar tragedies. Linda Wilson embraced these new tools, creating Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, and YouTube videos dedicated to keeping her siblings' memory alive and their case in the public eye. Margaret Wilson, despite her advancing age and declining health, learned to use basic computer functions so she could participate in online forums dedicated to missing children cases. Her posts, written with the wisdom of someone who had survived decades of uncertainty, provided comfort and guidance to newly affected families while keeping her own children's case visible to thousands of people worldwide. The development of advanced age progression technology offered new hope for the Wilson family. In 2008, they commissioned updated images showing what Tommy, Rachel, and Mark might look like as adults in their 40s, distributing these images through traditional media and emerging social networks with renewed optimism. Se este caso já te prendeu, deixa o like. Isso ajuda a história dos irmãos Wilson a alcançar mais gente. Cold case DNA technology advanced significantly during this period, with laboratories developing techniques for extracting genetic information from increasingly degraded samples. While the Wilson case still lacked physical evidence, the family remained hopeful that future discoveries might somehow provide the biological material needed for DNA analysis. Linda Wilson's journalism career had evolved to focus primarily on criminal justice reform and cold case advocacy. She used her professional platform to highlight systemic issues within law enforcement agencies that allowed cases to go unsolved for decades, often using her siblings' case as an example of institutional failures. The economic recession of 2008 severely impacted law enforcement budgets across the country, leading to further reductions in cold case investigations. The Dallas Police Department eliminated its dedicated cold case unit, distributing responsibility for inactive cases among regular detectives who already carried heavy caseloads of active investigations. Margaret Wilson's health reached a critical point in 2009 when she was diagnosed with advanced cancer, forcing the family to confront the possibility that she might never learn the truth about her children's fate. Despite her illness, she continued to review case files and correspond with law enforcement officials, driven by an unshakable belief that answers were still possible. The rise of amateur detective communities online provided both opportunities and challenges for the Wilson family. While some volunteers conducted legitimate research that generated useful leads, others promoted conspiracy theories or pursued false information that wasted valuable time and resources. As the case approached its 35th anniversary in 2009, Linda Wilson organized the most comprehensive review of evidence and theories ever undertaken by the family, hoping that fresh eyes and new technologies might identify previously overlooked clues that could finally break the case open and provide the answers her mother desperately needed. Margaret Wilson's battle with cancer added urgency to the family's search efforts as 2010 approached. The diagnosis had come as a devastating blow to a woman who had already endured 35 years of unimaginable grief, but it also ignited a fierce determination to find answers before it was too late. Linda Wilson took extended leave from her position at the Dallas Morning News to care for her mother, while simultaneously intensifying their investigation, knowing that time was running out for the woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to finding her missing children. The proliferation of genetic genealogy services like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA opened new investigative possibilities, even for cases lacking traditional physical evidence. Linda Wilson submitted DNA samples from herself and extended family members to multiple databases, creating genetic profiles that might eventually connect to distant relatives of potential perpetrators. She spent countless hours learning about genetic genealogy techniques, attending webinars and conferences to understand how these tools might be applied to her siblings' case. Margaret Wilson's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Chen, became an unexpected ally in the family's search efforts. Dr. Chen had worked with many terminal patients who carried unresolved grief, and she understood the unique psychological burden that Margaret carried. She adjusted Margaret's treatment schedule to accommodate important case-related activities, and even helped Linda coordinate with other medical professionals who had experience with trauma-related advocacy work. Social media campaigns generated unprecedented visibility for the Wilson case during this period. A Facebook page dedicated to Tommy, Rachel, and Mark Wilson gained over 15,000 followers within 6 months, with supporters from around the world sharing anniversary posts, age progression images, and appeals for information that reached audiences far beyond Dallas or Texas. Linda Wilson spent hours each day managing these online platforms, responding to messages, and following up on tips that came through social media channels. The family established a dedicated tip line in 2011, using Margaret's modest savings to pay for a toll-free number and voicemail system that could be accessed 24 hours a day. Linda Wilson checked the messages religiously, documenting every call and following up on anything that seemed potentially relevant, no matter how far-fetched it might initially appear. Margaret Wilson's declining health made every day precious and every lead urgent. Despite requiring extensive medical treatment, including chemotherapy and radiation, she insisted on participating in interviews with journalists, documentary filmmakers, and law enforcement officials. Her hospital room became an extension of their home office, with case files, photographs, and correspondence spread across every available surface. The creation of a comprehensive timeline became one of Margaret's final major contributions to the investigation. Working with Linda during lucid moments between treatments, she reconstructed every detail of June 15, 1974, creating minute-by-minute accounts of the family's activities leading up to the children's disappearance. This timeline included previously forgotten details about conversations, phone calls, and interactions that might have seemed insignificant at the time, but could potentially provide crucial context for investigators. Linda Wilson established relationships with cold case specialists across the country during this period, seeking advice and expertise from investigators who had successfully resolved decades-old cases. These consultations provided new perspectives on evidence analysis and investigative strategies, while also offering emotional support from professionals who understood the unique challenges of long-term missing persons cases. Margaret Wilson's determination remained unshakable even as her physical condition deteriorated. She refused pain medications that might cloud her thinking during important case discussions and insisted on reviewing every piece of correspondence and every new lead that emerged. Her dedication inspired Linda to maintain the same level of commitment, ensuring that their mother's life work would continue regardless of what the future might bring. The family's financial situation had become increasingly precarious due to medical expenses and Margaret's inability to work, but they continued to allocate resources toward the search whenever possible. Linda Wilson took on freelance writing assignments and speaking engagements to generate income, while caring for her mother and maintaining their investigative efforts, demonstrating the same resilience and determination that had characterized the Wilson family for nearly 4 decades. Margaret Wilson passed away peacefully on March 12, 2016, surrounded by Linda and close family friends who had supported their search for decades. Her final words to Linda were a whispered request to never stop looking for them, a promise that Linda made without hesitation as she held her mother's hand during those last precious moments. The woman who had spent 41 years and 9 months searching for her children died without knowing their fate, but her legacy of persistence and unwavering love would continue to drive the investigation forward. Margaret's funeral drew over 300 attendees, including retired law enforcement officials, journalists who had covered the case over the decades, and families from across the country who had been inspired by her extraordinary persistence and grace under unimaginable circumstances. Detective Morrison's widow attended, representing the original investigative team that had worked so hard to find answers in those crucial early weeks and months. Linda Wilson inherited not only her mother's determination, but also 4 decades of meticulously documented case materials that filled an entire room of their family home. The collection included correspondence with law enforcement agencies spanning multiple states, private investigators' reports from 7 different firms, witness statements that had been gathered independently of official investigations, and over 8,000 tips that had been received through various channels over the years. The sheer volume of accumulated information represented both an invaluable resource and an overwhelming responsibility. Linda Wilson spent months organizing and digitizing documents, creating searchable databases that would allow for more sophisticated analysis of patterns and connections that might have been missed during previous reviews. This process revealed the extraordinary thoroughness of her parents' search efforts and the vast network of contacts they had developed over the decades. The establishment of advanced cold case units in several major cities during this period offered renewed hope for resolving decades-old mysteries. Linda Wilson contacted these specialized teams in Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio, hoping that fresh perspectives and modern technologies might identify previously overlooked evidence or connections in her siblings' case. Each consultation provided new insights while also confirming the thoroughness of her parents' previous efforts. Linda Wilson's advocacy work evolved significantly following her mother's death. She transformed their informal network of supporters into the Tommy, Rachel, and Mark Wilson Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to advocating for cold case investigations and supporting families dealing with long-term missing persons cases. The foundation provided resources, including legal guidance, emotional support, and investigative assistance to other families, while continuing to publicize her siblings' case. DNA phenotyping technology, which could predict physical characteristics from genetic material, became available in the late 2010s, offering new possibilities for cases that lacked traditional physical evidence. While the Wilson case still had no DNA samples to analyze, Linda Wilson remained optimistic that future discoveries might somehow provide biological material that could be analyzed using these revolutionary techniques. The 2017 arrest of the Golden State Killer through genetic genealogy demonstrated the potential for solving decades-old cold cases using innovative investigative approaches that combine traditional detective work with cutting-edge genetic analysis. Linda Wilson immediately began working with genetic genealogy experts, hoping to apply similar techniques to her siblings' case, despite the significant challenges posed by the absence of physical evidence. Social media algorithms and advanced search capabilities allowed Linda Wilson to cast increasingly wider nets in her search for information. She developed sophisticated monitoring systems using Google Alerts, social media tracking tools, and specialized databases that flagged any online content mentioning her siblings' names, the date of their disappearance, or related keywords, ensuring that no potential lead would go unnoticed in the digital age. Linda Wilson's expertise in long-term missing persons cases had made her a respected voice in criminal justice reform circles by 2018. She testified before state legislative committees about the need for improved cold case investigation procedures, spoke at law enforcement conferences about family police cooperation, and consulted with other agencies on best practices for managing long-term investigations. The 45th anniversary of the disappearance in June 2019 marked a bittersweet milestone for Linda Wilson, who had now spent more of her life searching for her siblings than she had lived with them. The anniversary generated renewed media coverage from local and national outlets, including a feature story in People magazine and segments on several true crime podcasts. But Linda approached the attention with tempered expectations after decades of disappointment. In October 2019, during a routine digitization project aimed at converting decades of paper files into electronic format, Dallas Police Department records clerk Sarah Martinez made a discovery that would finally provide answers to one of the city's longest-running mysteries. Martinez, a dedicated employee with 15 years of experience in the records department, was working through boxes of archived case files from the 1970s when she noticed a folder that seemed out of place among traffic accident reports from 1975. The misfiled folder contained documents related to the Wilson children's disappearance, including witness statements, investigative notes, and evidence reports that had never been properly processed or investigated during the original case. Martinez immediately recognized the significance of her discovery, having heard about the Wilson case through department discussions and media coverage over the years. She contacted her supervisor, who immediately escalated the matter to Detective Maria Rodriguez, the current head of the Dallas Police Department's cold case unit. Among the forgotten documents was a detailed witness statement from Eugene Matthews, a 53-year-old park maintenance worker who had reported seeing a man talking to 3 children matching the Wilson siblings' description on the evening of their disappearance. Matthews' statement, taken on June 29, 1974, 2 weeks after the children vanished, described the man as approximately 40 years old, with brown hair and a thin build, driving a dark-colored sedan with what appeared to be temporary license plates. Matthews had told investigators that he observed the interaction from approximately 50 yards away while cleaning restrooms near the park's main pavilion. According to his statement, the man appeared to be offering the children something from his car, and all 3 children approached the vehicle willingly, suggesting they may have recognized him or felt comfortable with his approach. Matthews reported that he had attempted to report this information multiple times during the first week after the disappearance, but had difficulty reaching the right investigators due to the chaos and volume of tips being received. The misfiled documents revealed that Matthews had provided investigators with a partial license plate number, the letters HM followed by what he believed were the numbers 47, along with a detailed description of the suspicious man's appearance, clothing, and behavior. Even more shocking was the discovery that Matthews had been found dead in an apparent workplace accident just 3 months after providing his statement, a death that had never been investigated for potential connections to the Wilson case or any other pending criminal investigations. Detective Rodriguez immediately began a comprehensive review of the newly discovered evidence, working with a team of analysts to verify the authenticity of the documents and trace the investigative failures that had allowed crucial information to remain hidden for 45 years. The review revealed systematic problems in the original case management, including poor filing procedures, inadequate follow-up protocols, and insufficient communication between different investigative teams. Further investigation into Eugene Matthews' death revealed that he had been found at the bottom of a construction site ladder on September 18, 1974, apparently having fallen while performing routine maintenance work at a city facility. The scene had been processed as an accidental death without any consideration of potential connections to pending criminal investigations, despite Matthews' recent involvement as a witness in a high-profile missing persons case. Linda Wilson received a phone call from Detective Rodriguez on November 15, 2019, 45 years and 5 months after her siblings disappeared. The detective explained that newly discovered documents had prompted a complete review of the case and revealed investigative failures that had allowed crucial evidence to remain hidden for decades. Linda Wilson felt a mixture of hope and anger upon learning that answers might have been available all along if proper procedures had been followed. The partial license plate number provided by Matthews in 1974 had never been properly investigated due to the misfiling of his statement. When Detective Rodriguez ran the partial plate HM47 through modern database systems, cross-referencing with vehicle registrations from 1974, It matched a 1973 Chevrolet sedan that had been registered to Harold Kenneth Morrison, a 41-year-old Dallas area resident with a documented history of minor offenses involving inappropriate contact with children. Database searches revealed that Harold Morrison had moved to Arizona in February 1975, just 8 months after the Wilson children's disappearance and 5 months after Eugene Matthews' suspicious death. Morrison had lived quietly in Phoenix for 36 years before dying of natural causes in 2011, taking whatever secrets he possessed about the Wilson case to his grave and preventing any possibility of prosecution or confession. Investigation into Morrison's background revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior consistent with someone who might prey on vulnerable children. Police records showed multiple complaints from neighbors and school officials between 1972 and 1974 about inappropriate interactions with minors, including reports of Morrison offering rides to children, attempting to lure them to his residence, and making inappropriate comments about young people in his neighborhood. The investigation also revealed that Morrison had been employed as a maintenance worker at several Dallas area schools and recreational facilities during the early 1970s, positions that would have provided him with regular access to children and familiarity with locations like Reverchon Park, where the Wilson siblings disappeared. His work records showed that he had been terminated from at least 2 positions due to behavioral concerns, though no formal charges had ever been filed against him. Detective Rodriguez's team discovered that Morrison's 1973 Chevrolet had been found abandoned in a Phoenix parking lot in March 1975, just 1 month after his move to Arizona. The vehicle had been impounded and eventually destroyed, according to standard procedures, eliminating any possibility of forensic analysis that might have provided physical evidence connecting Morrison to the Wilson children's disappearance. The discovery of the misfiled documents and the subsequent investigation into Harold Morrison provided the Wilson family with the answers they had sought for 45 years. Though the truth came too late for Robert and Margaret Wilson to experience the closure they had desperately needed throughout their lives, Linda Wilson experienced a complex mixture of relief, grief, and anger upon learning that her parents had died without knowing the truth that had been available in police files all along. Linda Wilson held a press conference on January 15, 2020, exactly 45 years and 7 months after her siblings disappeared, to announce that their case had finally been resolved. Standing before assembled reporters, family friends, and law enforcement officials in the same Dallas courthouse where her parents had pleaded for help decades earlier, she expressed gratitude for the persistence of Dallas Police Department personnel who had never stopped caring about cold cases, while also highlighting the systemic failures that had allowed the truth to remain hidden for nearly half a century. Inscreva-se no nosso canal para explorar mais casos arquivados e perturbadores. Obrigado por acompanhar a história dos irmãos Wilson. Nos vemos no próximo vídeo. The Wilson children's case became a catalyst for significant reforms in cold case management procedures throughout Texas and beyond. The Dallas Police Department implemented new filing systems, established mandatory review protocols for witness statements, and created oversight mechanisms to ensure that crucial evidence would never again be lost due to administrative errors or investigative oversights. In the end, Tommy, Rachel, and Mark Wilson had been failed not by a lack of evidence, but by a system that lost the very clues that could have brought them home and brought their killer to justice decades earlier. 5 years have passed since the Wilson children's case was officially closed, and the impact of their story continues to reverberate through the halls of justice and the hearts of families across America. Linda Wilson, now 58 years old, stands in her parents' former home on Elm Street, surrounded by boxes of case files that will soon be donated to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children as part of their historical archives and training materials for future investigators. The house that once served as a command center for a 45-year search has been transformed into something resembling peace. The dining room table, which Margaret Wilson had covered with maps, photographs, and correspondence for decades, now holds fresh flowers and family pictures celebrating the lives Tommy, Rachel, and Mark might have lived. Linda has chosen to remember her siblings not as the missing children frozen in time at ages 9, 7, and 5, but as the adults they would have become. Tommy would be 54 now, Rachel 52, and Mark 50. The Tommy, Rachel and Mark Wilson Foundation has grown into a nationally recognized organization that has assisted over 200 families dealing with long-term missing persons cases. The foundation's headquarters occupy a modest office building in downtown Dallas, where Linda Wilson works alongside a dedicated staff of investigators, counselors, and advocates who understand the unique challenges faced by families caught in the limbo of unresolved disappearances. Perhaps most importantly, the foundation has successfully lobbied for the passage of the Wilson Children's Act in Texas, legislation that mandates specific protocols for managing cold case evidence and requires annual reviews of inactive missing persons cases. The law has become a model for similar legislation in 12 other states, ensuring that the administrative failures that plagued the Wilson investigation can never again deprive families of answers they desperately need. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who discovered the misfiled evidence that finally solved the case, has become a leading expert in cold case management and frequently speaks at law enforcement conferences about the importance of proper evidence handling procedures. She keeps a photograph of Tommy, Rachel, and Mark Wilson on her desk as a daily reminder of the human cost of investigative failures and the responsibility that comes with carrying a badge. The Reverchon Park, where the Wilson children disappeared, has been renovated and renamed the Wilson Memorial Park, featuring a beautiful playground and a memorial garden, with 3 benches bearing small plaques with the children's names and dates of birth. Local families bring their children to play there safely, while visitors from around the world come to pay their respects to 3 innocent souls whose tragedy helped improve the system for countless others. Sarah Martinez, the records clerk whose diligent work uncovered the misfiled documents, received a commendation from the Dallas Police Department and has since been promoted to supervisor of the records division. She has implemented comprehensive digitization projects and quality control measures that ensure no evidence will ever again be lost to bureaucratic oversights or human error. Linda Wilson has written a memoir titled Never Stop Looking, a family's 45-year search for truth, which became a bestseller and has been translated into multiple languages. The book's proceeds fund the Wilson Foundation's operations and provide financial assistance to families who cannot afford private investigators or other resources necessary for conducting their own searches for missing loved ones. The case has been featured in numerous documentaries, podcasts, and television programs, but Linda Wilson carefully controls how her siblings' story is told, ensuring that their memory is honored with dignity and that their tragedy continues to serve as a catalyst for positive change rather than mere entertainment for true crime enthusiasts. Harold Morrison's surviving relatives, contacted by investigators after the case was resolved, expressed shock and horror upon learning of his suspected crimes. They provided DNA samples and cooperated fully with the investigation, helping to confirm his identity as the perpetrator, while expressing deep sympathy for the Wilson family's decades of suffering. Morrison's nephew, David Morrison, has become an advocate for victims' rights and frequently speaks about the importance of recognizing warning signs of predatory behavior. The Dallas Police Department has established the Wilson Cold Case Unit, a specialized division dedicated exclusively to reviewing and investigating long-dormant cases using modern techniques and technologies. The unit has successfully resolved 18 cold cases in its first 4 years of operation, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers and demonstrating the value of dedicated resources and proper management. Linda Wilson has never married or had children of her own, choosing instead to dedicate her life to honoring her siblings' memory and helping other families navigate the nightmare of unresolved disappearances. She describes her work as a calling rather than a career, driven by the promise she made to her dying mother and the belief that every missing person deserves to be remembered and searched for with the same determination her parents showed for 45 years. The genetic genealogy techniques that revolutionized criminal investigations in recent years have been applied retroactively to several pieces of evidence from the original Wilson case, though no additional DNA evidence has been recovered. However, these advanced techniques have helped solve 3 other Dallas area cold cases that may have been connected to Morrison's activities, potentially identifying additional victims of his crimes. Robert and Margaret Wilson are buried side by side in Grove Hill Memorial Park, their headstone bearing the inscription, "Devoted Parents Who Never Stopped Believing." Linda Wilson visits their graves regularly, updating them on the Foundation's work and the ongoing impact of their children's story on families around the world. The investigation into Eugene Matthews' death was reopened following the resolution of the Wilson case, though the passage of time has made definitive conclusions impossible. However, the review revealed suspicious circumstances that strongly suggest Matthews was murdered to prevent him from providing additional information that might have led investigators to Harold Morrison decades earlier. Linda Wilson continues to receive letters from families dealing with missing persons cases, many expressing gratitude for the resources and advocacy her foundation provides, while others simply thank her for proving that persistence and hope can eventually triumph over even the most heartbreaking circumstances. She responds to every letter personally, understanding the desperate need for connection and support that drives people to reach out across the darkness of unresolved grief. The Wilson children's bedroom in their childhood home has been preserved exactly as it was in 1974, now serving as a memorial space where Linda Wilson can feel close to the siblings she lost so many years ago. Visitors to the Foundation's annual memorial service are invited to see the room, which serves as a powerful reminder of the innocent lives that were stolen and the family that was forever changed by one man's evil actions. The case has inspired changes in missing persons protocols across the country, with many law enforcement agencies adopting the Wilson model for family communication, evidence management, and long-term case review. Training academies now use the Wilson case as a study in both investigative failures and the importance of never giving up on missing persons cases, regardless of how much time has passed. As Linda Wilson prepares to retire from active leadership of the Foundation, she has established an endowment that will ensure the organization's work continues in perpetuity. She has also created a scholarship program for criminal justice students who demonstrate a commitment to cold case investigation and victim advocacy, ensuring that future generations of investigators will be better prepared to serve families facing the trauma of unresolved disappearances. The truth about Tommy, Rachel, and Mark Wilson's fate brought no real justice. Harold Morrison died peacefully in his sleep, never facing consequences for destroying a family and ending 3 innocent lives. But their story became something more powerful than justice. It became a force for change that has improved the system for countless other families and ensured that their memory will forever serve as a beacon of hope for those still searching in the darkness. In the end, the Wilson children's greatest legacy is not the tragedy of their disappearance, but the transformation their story inspired. Proof that love persists beyond death, that truth eventually emerges from even the deepest shadows, and that the determination of one family to never give up can change the world for thousands of others who refuse to let their missing loved ones be forgotten. The 3 children who vanished on a summer evening in 1974 became eternal symbols of hope, persistence, and the unbreakable bonds of family love that transcend even death itself.